Hey everybody, welcome back to Gideon Stuff. I hope you're doing well. I'm tired. Thanks for asking. So today's video is going to be a little bit of a follow-up to a video that I posted a couple of days ago about spine whacking a bunch of knives. I'm sure many of you have seen it. The video is doing fairly well. I think the reception to it has been pretty good as well. It's been a long couple of days. I wanted to make this follow-up video because, as with a lot of videos I make, after I publish the video, I always think about, like, what else could I have said? Did I miss something? Did I say something that was wrong? And so sometimes I'll, like, go through my videos again and I'll realize, oh, I could have done this better. And, you know, I always want to just kind of fix any imperfections, you know, kind of make things as good as possible. And I got a couple of comments on that video that actually made me really want to film this review, or this video, to discuss or really elaborate more on some of the things that we touched on in the spine whack testing video. Mostly themes of quality, testing methods, and why should we care, right? So, I've actually got my computer here. The other day, yesterday, I got a comment from Canadian Cutting Edge. Definitely go check him out over there. Jake's a fun guy. I like his channel a whole lot. And actually, it's ironic that he commented on this video, and I'm making this video right now because maybe I'll try and post this Wednesday. It's Tuesday right now. Maybe I'll try and post this Wednesday, depending on if I have time to edit things up or anything. But, excuse me. Yeah, it's funny that he should have commented because I actually mentioned him in Saturday's video. On Saturday, we're having IEDC $5 knives for 2 weeks coming out. Kind of a fun video. I'm really excited about that. And one of the Ozark Trail knives that I used in this experiment was actually one that I saw on CCE's channel recently. I think I bought the knife before I saw it on his channel, but I saw it on his channel and I decided I was going to use that knife for this experiment. So, yeah. Check him out. So, his comment is pretty long, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to use it to kind of make this video, because I think he touches on a lot of good points, and I think this is kind of a good little roadmap for this video. So, again, we've got some other comments. We'll be touching on those as well. Excuse me. So he starts off by saying, I don't understand the fascination that we knife nerds have with non-normal use testing of EDC knives. I'm glad he included the we there, because we all are kind of obsessed with it. It's weird. Sure, I understand that stronger is better, but I think we usually fail to stress that strong enough is strong enough. I would happily carry and use any of the knives that failed in the testing. Okay, so fair point. And actually this brings up a comment that came from channel member David Goodridge. He said, I saw a video recently where Hinderer knives were failing. I saw that one too. I think that was Neves who showed that. Kind of disturbing. However, I don't know of a situation where these movements would occur. Thanks. So I kind of want to tackle these two topics in one here. So, first of all, why do we have this fascination with non-normal testing? I don't know. I think mostly because it's cool, right? It makes for fun videos. A lot of times my cold steel videos, they're the most watched videos on my channel. It's because I do stupid stuff with cold steel knives because I can get away with it. They can take it, and it's fun. And it's fun to watch. It's entertainment, right? And that's what YouTube is. It's entertainment, you know? I'm out here providing the service of knife reviews. No. The service I'm providing to you guys is entertainment. So, it's fun to see that kind of stuff. Stressing that strong enough is strong enough. Yeah, so if you guys saw my video, need my caffeine, from a few months back, talking about my new SRK, cold steel SRK, I actually mentioned in that video how I hate Calculated Survival's testing method where he puts a knife on 2 pieces of wood and smashes it with another piece of wood to see if it bends or breaks. And I think that's kind of a dumb test, because I don't think that kind of stress can be is recreating anything that you're likely to put your knife through in normal use. And I've said many times on my channel that I don't necessarily do knife testing because the testing I do is just using the knife day to day, right? And I use the knife as it was intended. So like my Cold Steel SRK, I beat the crap out of that knife, right? You guys know when I was working in the woods, when I go out in the field, I take my SRK a lot of the time. And it's because it's a knife that I know can take a beating. And I expect it to, and I use it that way. I've done a lot of hard use stuff with my SRK. However, if I'm EDCing this CJRB mica, I'm not expecting it to do the same things, and I'm not going to baton with this. I'm not going to try chopping anything with this. I'm just going to use it as a pocket knife throughout my day-to-day life, because honestly, I don't give a damn whether or not I could cut down a tree with the mica. I mean, it'd kind of be cool if I could, but that's not something that I'd ever really be interested in doing, ever. I carry knives and I use them the way that they're meant to be used, right? He said here that he'd happily carry and use any of the knives that failed in the testing. I'll tell you one thing, Jake, not the Kaiser Towser K. So if you guys remember from the video of the Kaiser Towser K, that knife failed in my hands several times. It happened on video, I think once or twice. That knife has issues. That's a sketchy knife. And that one, in the review, I tore it a new one because I was using it as a normal, everyday carry pocket knife, and the blade was closing on me. And it's a liner lock. It's not supposed to do that. And so that was a huge issue, right? But then we also had like the CJRB Resource that failed a couple spine whack tests. Well, I was using that knife on the ranch, and it wasn't failing on me. I kind of thought it was good. It failed in the testing video, though. You know, is that really indicative of anything? I don't know. We'll get into that more later. On to kind of Dave's question. He doesn't know of a situation where that would happen. I can actually talk about a few situations where it's happened to me or people I know. So one of the things is when I was, growing up on the ranch, one of the things we do is we cut the string on the round bales of hay when we're feeding the cows. And when you do that, you go and you're kind of raking your knife across and you're trying to cut all these strings. And there's, if you've ever seen a baled round, there's dozens and dozens of these little tiny strings. They're in clusters or they're just single. They're kind of all over the place. And sometimes you'd be cutting, you have to go back to make another cut, or you're cutting, you can reach forward to get another reach at it. And sometimes you come back and hit another string, get caught in the hay or something. And if the lock on your knife wasn't good, it would close in your hand. I know more than one guy that almost lost a finger that way because he's cutting the hay bale and the lock fails. It happens, right? I've also had locks fail on me when I'm breaking down cardboard. A couple of times I've been breaking down cardboard and maybe I've hit something that's a little bit thicker than anticipated, or something happens where, I kind of change direction with my cut. If I try and pull out of that, sometimes the blade can get stuck, close on your hand. So it's definitely something that can happen. Now, Dave also mentioned the hinderers failing issue. And that's something I want to talk about. I think that the spine whack testing on more expensive knives can show when makers maybe aren't taking enough care with their machining, with their QC, things like that. Because yeah, if you've got a $600 hinderer and the lock bar is just sliding over, like butter, that's probably not good. That feels a little bit lazy to me. Now, is it going to affect you in your use? I don't know, right? Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I don't think it's acceptable for a $600 knife to have that issue. Obviously, I'm not someone that has any hinderers, but I know that in Jared's video, several of the hinders that he talked about, he talked about that he'd use them and stuff, and he hadn't experienced failures during use, but they were failing the spine whack test. And so, if they weren't failing during use, does it matter that much? But then again, $600 knife. Personally, for me, I feel like, yeah, that feels a little bit lazy. If your $600 knife has bad lock face geometry. And, but again, if you're using it just like a knife and it's fine, it doesn't really matter that much, right? Again, me with the CJRB Resource. As I was using it and carrying it, I never had any issues, but it failed the spine whack test. And we'll get to more of that as we go on. Thanks for your summary. I hope most people watched it, but I expect your view time stats are like mine and people tend to skip it. Yeah. Shout out to all the content creators out there who look at your little video analytics and you're like, oh, people are skipping over this, that, and that. Yeah, I know you guys. You skip through all the video. Shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that is something that I think about a lot, is whether or not, and I've noticed I get so many comments all the time where someone will say something like, but what about blank? Or, hey, have you ever thought of X? Hey, what can the knife do XYZ? I'm like, wait, I addressed all of this in the video. You just didn't watch it. So yeah, I do get comments like that quite often, and they do kind of frustrate me. I spend a lot of time into making these videos, and I know I make a lot of long videos. You know, most of my videos are about 25 minutes long, but you know, I put a lot of time and care into these. You mentioned the scientific method. Thanks, I did. But I do wonder about a couple of things. Were there any testing standards other than what we can see in the video? For example, did you make sure there was no pivot lubrication on the locks before testing? Do any of the liner locks and frame locks have weak detent pressure or the detent equivalent on crossbar or other spring tension locks? And I would also want to repeat what you said in your summary. We'll go to that later. Okay, so on to the scientific testing thing. This is probably going to get a little bit long-winded, but this is something that I want to talk about. I talked about it quite a bit in that video, but we're going to go even deeper right now. All right, so as a lot of you guys know, I'm a scientist, so I take scientific testing very seriously. And as I said in the spine whack testing video, there's a reason why I try and keep scientific testing as far away from my channel as possible. And so let's go ahead and give some examples on why. I'm a co-author on some research that's going to be published here pretty quickly. It's very exciting. I'm really, really stoked about it. Also, ignore the wind. It's really blustery today. And there's been a lot of work put into this research, obviously. And I'm going to try not to get too technical here, but the research is focused around understanding Paleoproterozoic tectonic provinces, specifically the Mazatzal province here in southern New Mexico. And what the Mazatzal is a sequence of rocks that preserves an event that dates back to 1.6 billion years ago. And there's a lot of these tectonic provinces or orogenies that kind of built North America. And one of the least understood is the Mazatzal. It's pretty poorly understood. And so this research team that I was part of, we're trying to recreate what happened 1.6 billion years ago, right? And so there's a lot of things that went into this, a whole lot of things. Map making. I've been out there for months, pretty much, days and days at a time. Most weekends last semester I was out there making a map at 1 to 12,000 scale, mapping all these different rock exposures in these mountains. And then we had to take measurements of these rocks, measurements called trend and plunge that show us the rock's orientation in relation to each other. That shows us how they were deformed. And we're taking samples of these rocks so we could learn more about them. And all the rocks are metamorphic. And a metamorphic rock is a rock that has undergone metamorphosis from an earlier rock called a protolith. So this is a pre-existing rock, igneous sedimentary or metamorphic rock, that is then exposed to intense heat and pressure, and the rock has changed on a physical and mineralogical scale. And so metamorphic rocks are kind of hard to work with because, like, if you want to date them, typically you can't date the protolith. You can't date the original rock. You can only date basically the time of recrystallization, and that's helpful for sure, but it wasn't super helpful for a lot of the stuff that we were trying to do. And we wanted to kind of get age constraints on when deformation happened, when these rocks were folded, and what kind of stressors were causing that. Was it a subduction zone causing compression? Was it an extensional basin causing, extension? That was an important question. And so we wanted to have age constraints on these rocks. However, metamorphic rocks, they're very, very hard to date. Luckily, we found some gabbro that was intruding into these metamorphic rocks. And gabbro is an igneous rock, and because it was intruding into the gneisses and amphibolites that we were looking at, we knew it was younger. And so it had to have been emplaced before, or I mean after the deformation of all these other rocks, because the gabbro itself did not show the same kinds of foliations in it. However, dating that gabbro turned out to be difficult because it was pretty altered. When rocks are exposed to wind and rain and the sky, the atmosphere, chemical reactions go on, right? And so you can lose a lot of valuable data. Minerals get corrupted, you could say. And so there wasn't a whole lot of usable data that we could get from this gabbro, which was super, super frustrating. However, we then found a granite intruding into the gabbro. And this was kind of what my project was. And this granite was less altered, and we knew that since it was intruding the gabbro, it was younger than the gabbro. So if we could get an age on that granite, we would have a ceiling for the age of deformation for the metamorphic rocks, right? So then we had to sample that granite. We took chunks of it, and we hiked it out of the mountains. We took it back to the lab. When we got to the lab, we crushed it up. We powdered it. We took that rock dust, basically, and we put it through a water table. And this water table sifted out all the heavy elements. We didn't want any of the heavy elements. There are oxides and things like that, elements that, minerals and elements that are not very useful for what we want to do. So after we did that, we were left with the light stuff. And then we took that to a magnetic separator. And we took out all the magnetic stuff and more of the heavy things. And then we took it to a liquid separator. And we separated out even more of the dense stuff that we didn't get in the first 2 rounds. And then when we finally had what was left, we took it and we treated it with some special acids. We did some mineral picking, and we finally were able to find some zircons to date. And these zircons are what we sent off to the lab to be dated. And we had to make sure that the sample that we sent had no contaminants, that there was nothing in there that would mess up the analyses in any way. It was a lot of work, right? And so the reason I tell this story is to let you know how much work I would have to put into these tests if I want to do them scientifically. Yeah, I would absolutely have to make sure that every single knife had the same amount of lube on it. I have to make sure that they all had the same tension on the lock bar. There is so much that I would have to put into these tests, and that is why I'm not interested in doing scientific testing at all, right? Other people on YouTube have tried to do it to varying degrees of success. Cedric and Ada, they do a lot of edge retention tests, and I think that they do a fairly good job. Not perfect by his own admission, but you know, it's really good testing. Turning to another comment from Gonzalez. From Gonzalez. That was really weird. I grew up in New Mexico. I would love to see some mechanical slicing done, cardboard rope and maybe wire, some microscope shots before, during, and after, see what each metal configuration looks like after 1,000 swipes. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm not going to do that. That's, you know, if I'm testing knives for edge retention and things like that, yeah, I'd have to make sure that every single edge was sharpened exactly the same way. I had to make sure that I'm applying the same amount of pressure on each thing. It's exhausting. And I made fully clear in the spine whack video that was not a scientific test. And I had a lot of issues with that test. And I have a lot of issues with spine whacking in general that we'll be getting more into. But yeah, scientific testing on the channel, it would take me forever. It'd take me too long, and I do that in my life outside of the channel. So I you know, like the channel, this is what I do, like, for fun. Like, I don't have to work super hard for the channel, right? I do work very hard on the channel, but you get the idea. So yeah, there's that. Also, I want to repeat what you said in your summary to make sure viewers understand that just because your specific copy of knife model failed, it doesn't necessarily mean that that model is inherently weaker and more prone to that failure, as it's only testing one example. Yeah, absolutely. And I said that in the video. And again, that goes into this. If I was to be testing all this scientifically, I'd want to get 10, 20, 30 copies of a knife I wanted to test. Let's say I want to test the Rat 1. I'd have to have 25 rat ones, test them all, make sure I'm smacking them with the exact same amount of pressure and force. It would just be ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. So yeah. And one of the things I said in my video is this is just my results. The best way, in fact, I think the only way the community can ever really use these spine whack tests in any useful metric is if someone were to put together a spreadsheet, and no, it's not going to be me, where they watch every single video of people spine whacking knives, like, okay, how many times has a rat 1 been spine whacked? Here's how many times it failed, here's how many times it passed. And then just have this spreadsheet open to the community, and people can just add in, oh, I spine whacked the MTech Boogaloo, and this is what happened. Oh, I also spine whacked the MTech Boogaloo, and this is what happened. And that way you could get kind of an idea, kind of an average of what's failing and what's not, but even then, it's not empirical data. So, yeah. Okay, now we talk a little bit more about specifically the spine whack test. Now, specifically speaking to the spine whack test, I grew up with slip joint knives, the odd backlock too. Remember, I'm reading Jake's words here. And my father made a point to train me to be safe with a slip joint knife and always use a knife in such a way that there is no pressure on the spine of the blade. And if I was ever tempted to use a knife that way, I should be expecting to hurt myself and instead use some other tool for the job instead. And I agree with that. Definitely, you know, practice knife safety, for sure. I talked about the hay string issues. I've also talked about on the channel, my great uncle invented this thing called the hay tomahawk, where it's basically a piece of an old triangle saw blade that's cut and attached to a handle, so you can rake it through the hay like that and not worry about using your knife. That is a really useful tool. It definitely has some cons, and definitely it has some things that make it less desirable than a pocket knife. It's still an amazing tool, but anyways, continuing. Perhaps that's why I like small fixed blades so much. Small fixed blades are awesome. Especially when doing outdoor stuff, though I do carry folding knives as my preferred urban EDC. In a nutshell, treat every folding knife as though it was a slip joint, and you'll be using your knife in the safest way possible so that even if you get an unexpected catastrophic failure from even the strongest lock, you will still keep all your fingers intact. Can't say anything against that. Yeah, absolutely, be safe. I think this type of safe knife use is what we should be promoting, especially knife newbies. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I do think that teaching knife safety is far more important than running around whacking the back of your knife on boards, right? And actually, I was thinking about this a lot recently. I recently made a friend who he's a neat guy. He's quite a bit younger than me. He's 18, and he has found my channel. We talked about that a little bit. He's into knives and stuff. And I got to thinking, like, you know, I definitely have videos that, most of my videos, in fact, encourage safe use of tools. And I have videos talking exclusively about how to use knives safely and how to be safe and how to sharpen and things like that. But I started thinking, like, you know, that's probably not going to be one of my first videos he sees. He's probably going to see this spine whacking video where I'm doing something that is stupid. That's not a great look, right? But yeah, safety first. That goes without being said. I've talked a lot about this too, though, how I think that the best folding knife for like giving a teenager who's just starting with knives is an assisted opening locking knife. And the reason I think this is because, number one, you know, if it's got a flipper tab and they hit it, if it's a good assisted knife and that blade comes out and locks up solidly every single time, that avoids a lot of, you know, potential accidents with maybe, you know, if they don't have the strength to flip a manual knife and doesn't lock up all the way or something like that. And also the assisted opening mechanism teaches kids to close knives two-handed because you have to push against that spring tension. I remember the worst cut I ever got in my life was on a slip joint knife when I was a kid. Actually, probably not the worst one I've ever had. The one I did with the Tucson a couple years back, that one was probably the worst knife cut I've had. But at the time when I was a kid, it was pretty bad, and it was because it was a slip joint knife, and even though I was closing it two-handed, I let that spring get away from me, and it slammed shut, cut the end of my nail clean off. In fact, you can still kind of see the scar under there. Awful, awful cut. And you know, a assisted knife, you know, you get to follow it the whole way, and then even if you do let go of it, it's going to spring open instead of close on your fingers or something like that. I like assisted opening knives for kids. I might be in the minority there, but I think that I think an assisted opening knife is great for a kid. But I also agree with what Jake's saying here. You know, treat every knife like it's a slip joint, and use your knives in the way they're intended. That is the main message here. And I'll be honest with you. If I spine whacked this knife here and it failed, I wouldn't care at all, because I'm not using this knife in any way that would make that kind of stress, right? I'm not using this knife for anything crazy or ridiculous. And so if I start whacking its spine on something and it fails, I'm not gonna be like, oh my goodness, my knife is useless. No. All it needs to do is stay open while I'm using it to open an Amazon package or something, right? All right, let's go ahead and finish up his comment. Finally, maybe this comes with age. I grew weary of the hype in the knife industry. This is not directly related to your video, Gideon, but I wanted to mention it. And we're going to talk about this. Well, we are inundated with hype from various sides in the knife hobby, with someone constantly telling us that their new product is better in some way than whatever the current top product is. Yeah, it happens with pretty much every type of consumer product. It does happen with a lot of products, but I will say I see it acutely in the knife world. Yeah, hype is insane. And I'll be honest with you, there is so much getting released these days. So much. As someone who, you know, yeah, I've had companies send me things for review. A lot of viewers sent me stuff to review. But, you know, I have to buy quite a few of the things I review, and then I can sell them or give them away later, but I've got to kind of buy some stuff. Honestly, I haven't bought a knife in a long time. I bought the Reaper Brigade was the last knife I bought, because I think I've got an idea for that knife. But I haven't bought any new knives in a while. And part of that is because Old Tom Guy sent me a box of knives to review, and I thought that was so cool because a lot of the knives there were older knives, but they're interesting knives. They are so interesting. In fact, you guys are going to be getting the first review from that box coming up next week, so stay tuned for that. And it's a discontinued knife. I decided to review a discontinued knife. Why? Because I thought it was a really cool knife. And there's so much stuff getting thrown around nowadays where it's just, you know, this is the biggest and best thing right now. This is the new shiny toy. It does get ridiculous. It does get ridiculous. And I'll be honest, I've had a hard time watching certain knife channels recently because, like, oh my goodness, they just get so many new knives in, and it's just this parade of flashy models. And I can tell you right now, like, I can only think of a few knives right now that I'm even interested in getting on the channel to look at, because everything else just fades into the background. It's all just white noise. And yeah, the hype is insane. I think that's another thing with the spine whack testing, though, is people pointing out that a lot of companies are just churning out model after model after model without necessarily making sure that they've got all their stuff together. So, just to kind of sum up my thoughts on the whole thing, what do I feel about spine whack testing? I definitely think that if you're going to put a lock on a knife, it needs to work. It needs to work. It just does. Now, I don't think every knife needs to be bomb-proof. I don't think every knife needs to be a cold steel. I love my cold steels, and I love that my cold steels are so tough, as you guys know from all the videos. And as someone who uses my knives very, very hard, again, on the ranch, when I'm cowboying, when I'm out in the field for days and days on end, and I literally have to rely on my knife as a survival tool. It's my tool that gets me fed every morning and gets a fire built in the night, right? I do enjoy using my knives very hard, but I'm also in academia. I work in a natural history museum. I live in town right now. I know what it's like to be just a very regular knife user, opening packages, cutting some things for my lunch, cutting strings, digging splinters, things like that. And yeah, honestly, I don't need my knife to be able to withstand blows, repeated blows to the spine. And now this brings me to the spine whack test in general. I think there's a lot of issues with the spine whack test. Number one, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily reflective of real world stresses. There are definitely knives that have issues with lockup, and it's never acceptable. Again, Kaiser Towser K. I've had a lot of issues with that knife. It failed on me just through regular EDC use. That's not okay. That's never okay. That is never okay. I do think that the spine whack test maybe should mean a little more for, especially like, I'm going to bring up Hinderer knives again. And again, you know, please, Daddy Rick, don't sue me. I've never owned a Hinderer knife, but they're marketed as overbuilt American tanks. And if they're, and I'll be honest with you, I saw Neve's video. It was like, dink, and it would fail. That is unacceptable. $600 for what's supposed to be an overbuilt pocket knife, and it fails that easily? No. No. Get that out of here, right? And I think in that case, maybe Hinderer setting themselves up for failure just because of their marketing. But that's another thing too. If I have a knife and I'm whacking it repeatedly until it fails, obviously it's going to fail at some point. You're vibrating the, interface between the blade and the lock, and eventually something's going to give, right? That happens. And so for me, it's not really a big issue unless, if I strike it one time softly and it fails, there's probably an issue with the lockup geometry. There's probably an issue with the detent strength or something, because that shouldn't happen. However, if I have to repeatedly smack a knife to make it fail, in my mind, that's not a big deal, because that is stress abuse. I'm going to bring up an old name here that I'm sure none of you have heard in days. Joe X. Fun channel. Very entertaining, right? I think his testing is stupid as fuck. I'll just be honest. It is, right? And I mean, if you like watching it, that's fine. It's entertainment, right? For sure. But yeah, he tests to destruction. I have no interest in testing to destruction. I use a knife as it was meant to be used. And if I have serious flaws with it, I'll tell you. If I don't, I'm going to assume it's fine, right? Whether that's a hunting knife, whether it's an EDC knife, or what have you. If it performs the tasks that it says it should be able to perform well, then we're fine. So you might be wondering, then why did you decide to do a spine whack testing video, Gideon? Well, for one, because I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be really interesting. For two, because I really, really wanted to make jokes about whacking off with knives in my garage, as you guys saw in the opening, so, I did. And then, three, because I did want to kind of use it as a way to discuss some of the things that we've discussed here in this video. And again, this video is kind of just a part 2 to that, where we go a little bit more in depth. I did cut a lot out of my original video. I know, it was like a 30-minute video, and I cut stuff out. But yeah, spine whack testing is something that I think gets sensationalized a little bit. But it, I see why people are into it, right? So, summary for those of you that have skipped through the video to just this part. Number 1. Actually, I can't remember what order we talked about these things in. It's been a long day. But here's the takeaways. Here's the takeaways. Number 1. If a knife fails a spine whack test, does it automatically mean it's a bad knife? No, absolutely not. Some knives are light-duty EDC knives, and that is fine. They can exist and be a light-duty knife and be completely fine. Number 2, the spine whack test is really kind of a measure of quality of machining when it comes to higher-end knives, I feel like. And honestly, it should only kind of be taken seriously if it's being applied to knives that are claiming to be overbuilt and strong. Number 2, or number 3, I can't even count. We do not do scientific testing on this channel because there are way too many variables to keep track of, and I don't think it's really applicable to carrying an EDC knife. I will always just do my real world use with a knife, and I think that that's absolutely fine. Number 3, good golly gracious, Gideon. You know how I said I'm like a co-author on scientific research that's coming out? Yeah, I can't even count. I need to be shot. Number 4. Practice knife safety. Be safe, be smart, don't be dumb. Goodness gracious. Don't give in to hype, right? Take everything with a grain of salt. If you enjoy a knife, you do you. Don't make anyone feel like the knife you have sucks, or that there's, you know, something better out there that you need. If you're happy with what you've got, you're good. What else do I need to say? You know what's sad is I've actually got somewhere to be in like half an hour. I've been doing nothing but running for the past couple of weeks. It's been a wreck. But yeah, I want to talk about this a little bit. When I start editing this, if I feel like there's things I missed, I'll throw it in. But yeah, thank you again to Jake for the comment. I think he hit a lot of things right on the head. There is a lot of nuance to the spine whack testing videos, for sure. There's some good information you can get. But there's also a lot of stuff that really isn't applicable to a whole lot of people's lives. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Thank you so much for watching. Shout out to channel members right here at the cowboy level: Sharpen Blade, Dave Goodridge, and Old Tonto Guy. And by the way, check out Sharpen Blade's channel. He's another Canadian knife YouTuber. He's awesome. And if you want to become a channel member, you can do all that stuff. There's buttons down below. We've got cool stuff going on over there. Yeah, kind of a weird video. Sorry if I bored you guys with like the geology talk. For those of you that are interested, I am taking steps to launch my new channel where I talk about geology and science, evolution and paleontology, things like that. So when that's ready, I'll announce it. It'll be fun, hopefully. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, comment below, and subscribe. I've been Gideon, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.